In 2007, one of Iran's most dangerous generals checked into a hotel in Istanbul. His name was Ali-Reza Asgari, and he carried 30 years of Iran's deepest secrets in his head. This is the man who helped start Iran's nuclear program, who trained the man behind the Marine barracks attack, the kind of man intelligence agencies follow obsessively. If he sneezes, the CIA wants to know about it. But one afternoon in Istanbul, he simply disappeared. No struggle, no witnesses, no trail. He was never seen again. Iran says he was kidnapped. Others say he defected. But here's what we know for sure. After he vanished, Israel destroyed a Syrian nuclear reactor. Mossad took out the world's most wanted man, and Iran's top nuclear scientist was assassinated. These were not coincidences. So what really happened to Iran's missing general? Ali-Reza Asgari was like the Forrest Gump of Iran's shadow war against the West. If something major was happening in the 1980s and 90s, there's a good chance he was somehow involved. It started in 1979 when Iran flipped. What had been a Western allied monarchy became an Islamic republic almost overnight. For some, this marked the end of a golden age in their country. For Asgari, it was his time to shine. He joined the Revolutionary Guard and rose quickly through the ranks. When Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, he was there. He organized and trained a militant group to fight back. Under his guidance, this small militia grew into a major force that eventually became known as Hezbollah. It served as a powerful proxy for Iran, unleashing kidnappings and terror attacks against Western targets. Asgari spent a decade running Iran's operations in Lebanon. By the time he was done, Lebanon wasn't just an ally, it was a satellite country where Hezbollah had more guns, more money, and more power than the actual government. His men affectionately called him chieftain. He was a born leader in a country that wasn't his, patiently cultivating men who would go on to do horrific things. During that time, he worked directly with a young operative who would become one of the most dangerous men in the world, Ahmad Moghniya. Moghniya was in his 20s when Asgari started working with him. With Asgari as his mentor, Moghniya orchestrated some of the worst terror attacks of the 20th century. The Marine barracks strike that took 241 American lives, the hijacking of TWA Flight 847, the destruction of the US Embassy in Beirut. Until 9/11, US officials blamed him for the murder of more Americans around the world than any other terror suspect, earning him a spot on the FBI's most wanted list with a $5 million bounty on his head. While Forrest was inventing the smiley face and inspiring Elvis, Asgari was grooming an arch-villain fit for a Bond movie. Asgari eventually outgrew Lebanon and returned to Iran, where he became a deputy minister of defense. He was now part of the inner circle, at the center of Iran's biggest secrets. And that included an important new project that would change everything: Iran's nuclear program. And then, poof, he disappeared. So what really happened? Here's what we know for sure. In 2007, Asgari left Iran and traveled to Damascus, supposedly on a business trip. From there, he headed to Istanbul. Not the most direct route home, but also not completely out of the ordinary. Istanbul was a major hub where Iranian officials passed through all the time. He checked into a hotel, then nothing. He never checked out, never contacted his family. Turkish investigators found no body, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no trail. Just a trip that was supposed to be ordinary, but ended in mystery. When a guy like Asgari goes missing, people notice. Competing stories took shape in the news almost immediately. Multiple reports suggested that Asgari defected to the West, but Iranian officials claimed he was kidnapped. So did he defect, or was he kidnapped? The initial news articles were murky. Anonymous sources, conflicting details, rumors, and speculation. The idea that Asgari defected came from a range of sources. US officials, Israeli analysts, Turkish officials, even anonymous Iranian sources. One key fact mentioned by a few sources is that members of Asgari's family fled Iran right before his disappearance. If your family sneaks out of the country right before you disappear, that sure smells like a defection. But those sources turned out to be wrong. Weeks later, both of Asgari's wives were still in Iran along with his children. They held a press conference outside the Turkish embassy in Iran, blaming America and Israel for kidnapping their husband. They demanded an investigation. One of his wives insisted he would never defect. She said, when someone wants to defect, he will first take his family with him. She's got a point. And the US and Israel both had burning motives to snatch Asgari and bring him to justice. The US blamed him for decades of murdering and kidnapping Americans. And for Israel, the motive was even more personal. In 1986, an Israeli Air Force navigator was shot down over Lebanon. He was passed around by local militias like a trophy. Until, under Asghari's watch, he was acquired by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and never seen again. Israel spent years trying to get him back, even going so far as to kidnap 2 Hezbollah operatives to try and get information. Asghari was the head of the snake. If they had a chance to grab him from a hotel in Turkey, it would have been a no-brainer. But what if the man Israel wanted to capture was already working for the other side? According to multiple sources, Asghari had been spying for the West for years. By 2007, Iran's Secret Service was starting to suspect that Asghari was a mole, and he knew that his cover was about to be blown. If this is true, then leaving his family behind may have been the price he had to pay to get out alive. But hold on a second. Asghari's the guy who was there for everything. 3 decades of building up Iran's power. Why would he betray everything he stood for and just run away?
Why are you doing this?
I just felt like running.
Asghari's motives make a lot more sense when you understand what happened to him in the years leading up to his disappearance. Iran's political landscape was changing. A major battle was brewing, and Asghari found himself on the wrong side. Iranian President Khatami rose to power in the late 90s on a platform of reform. More freedom, more tolerance, less censorship. To be clear, it was still a dictatorship, but for Iran, it was something. He even considered warming relations with the West. But there was a major backlash from powerful hardliners who were more loyal to the supreme leader. They undermined his agenda, banning newspapers, cracking down on protesters, and even assassinating dissidents. Asghari remained loyal to President Khatami. That made him a target. Asghari was eventually arrested on charges of financial and moral corruption. Whether his arrest was driven by genuine wrongdoing, internal politics, or both, we can't say for sure. But he spent 18 months in prison. 18 grueling months under conditions that must have been unbearable. 18 months during which he was reportedly mistreated in horrific ways. After prison, he was a changed man. His friends described him as disillusioned and mentally disturbed. When he finally got out, the political landscape had shifted completely. A hardliner loyal to the supreme leader was now president. Asghari's allies were gone. He was no longer an insider. His entire world was upended. His power, his safety, his freedom were all at risk. The man who literally knew where all the bodies were buried knew that he could easily be the next one. No one could blame him if he wanted to run, and he wouldn't be the first. Asghari likely knew about Amir Ibrahimi, a former Iranian hardliner who had a change of heart after he witnessed vicious attacks on student protesters. When he tried to speak out against what he saw, his former comrades kidnapped him, threw him in a cell, and beat him for months. When he finally got out, he fled, first to Turkey, then to Germany. By 2007, he was living in Berlin, running a blog that called out the Iranian hardliners that used to be his colleagues. Ibrahimi is exactly the kind of guy you would turn to for advice about defecting. And according to Ibrahimi, he knows exactly what happened to Asghari. He claims that Asghari actually called him from Damascus, saying that he didn't want to go back to Iran and asking for help. At this point, Ibrahimi had connections with US intelligence and put together a plan with their help. Ibrahimi told Asghari to rent a car and drive to Istanbul. A $1,500 bribe got him past the border guards without a visa. When he got to Turkey, Asghari secretly met with a US embassy official who helped him sneak out of the country. He flew to a military base in Germany and then on to Washington, D.C. According to Ibrahimi, Asghari started a new life in the US, and Ibrahimi says he's even spoken to Asghari on the phone twice in the years that followed. If Ibrahimi's story is true, he wasn't the only one happy to hear Asghari's voice. In the months and years following his disappearance, there were a string of secret intelligence operations that shocked the world, supposedly based on information shared by Asghari. First, there was the destruction of a warehouse in the middle of the Syrian desert that turned out to be way more than it seemed. It was actually a top-secret nuclear reactor, specially designed with false walls to make it look like a simple warehouse, hiding in plain sight. According to a German Defense Ministry official, it was Asghari who provided evidence that helped the American and Israeli intelligence communities identify the hidden nuclear reactor. As a result, At midnight on September 6, 2007, the Israeli Air Force flew into Syrian airspace and destroyed the top-secret site. Asgari was also credited with identifying the director and mastermind of Iran's nuclear program, who was later assassinated using a remote-controlled robotic machine gun. And then there was Moghnia, the man Asgari mentored in Lebanon, the man he had helped turn into one of the most wanted men alive. In February 2008, not long after Asghari's disappearance, Mossad finally took out the man who eluded every intelligence agency for decades. Multiple reports credit Asghari's intelligence, saying that Asgari may have revealed Moghnia's secret residence in Damascus. If true, it's an incredible turn. The architect helped eliminate his own protege. Officially, the US has never confirmed Asghari's defection, but over the years, a remarkable number of intelligence insiders have spoken as if the defection happened. Former CIA officials, Israeli intelligence veterans, anonymous US government officials quoted in major newspapers. None of it amounts to official confirmation, but taken together, it paints a picture that's hard to ignore. Asghari's disappearance is still debated to this day, but the evidence points to this: the man who spent 30 years building Iran's shadow war eventually turned against all of it. Not because he was a traitor to his country, but because the system he built betrayed him first.